Welcome to the Montana Ministry Network podcast. This episode features session speaker Rich Greenwald at the 2024 Network Council in Great Falls, Montana. Let's get started.
Okay. It is working. I wasn't sure, in the beginning. All right. Well, you kind of met me upstairs. I'm Bonnie Wilson. And I was the accountant for a Head Start program in Billings, Montana for 20 years. And that's all fund accounting. And we had software that was very good at what it did and learned a lot. And then I've now been asked to do the church in Columbia Falls, where we're from. And it had been done previously on QuickBooks. And QuickBooks is just not really acceptable for fund accounting. It will try to explain to you, and they're good marketers, really good marketers, but they try to explain how you can do it, but it's somewhat inadequate. So we start with prayer, and I just ask, Lord, that you be here, that you give people the desire to know more and ask the questions, and that you grace me with the ability to either answer or give them my phone number and email, and I can look it up. That's all this is good for. And again, I lift before you the situation in Seattle. A grandparent from our church had asked for prayer for her grandson in a school in the Seattle area that had a shooter in the school, and they had killed a teacher, and there was another person that was down, and this poor child was terrified, just terrified. So Lord, I just ask you to put your arms around him and hold him tight and bring him home to his parents, and that it be a good result for whatever is going on. We lift it all into your name, because I know, Lord, you're concerned about every little detail. May your name be glorified in all things, Jesus. Amen. Okay, so I told you a little bit about myself, and that I've kind of been doing this for some 30-odd years. And so now it's nice to be old and I can help people, even though I'm finding myself at the church getting it all set up there. So I've really got some hands-on experience because I'm doing it right now. Part of the situation that the bookkeeper before had been doing QuickBooks, and QuickBooks said, oh yeah, we can do payroll the way it needs to be done. Well, the pastor of our church has a housing allowance. Unfortunately, the payroll was not being done right. And so that made it so that I had to go back over all 4 quarters of last year, amend all of those without having some of the documentation, because QuickBooks, when I asked them about it, they had no knowledge. They couldn't help me in the least. So luckily I know enough about doing that I could. And so, and then I had to go and submit a new W-2. Oh my goodness, IRS and Social Security Administration are so tight. I requested to have a login. They had to send the thing to pastor saying your employee wants to get into the records that people have here. Do you approve of that? And then he had to give me the code number to get into it. It was like, whoa, that is just incredible. But it's nice to know that IRS and Social Security are working hard at keeping people out, because they were almost doing that to me, but we got it done. But it had to do a whole new W-2 and it took such a long time for that process, because they don't just do it online, they send a mail so that they can really, and in order to prove that I was who I was, I had to tell them what my last Social Security payment was. They said, what was your last Social Security deposit payment? And then they said, well, if she knows that, then she's, she must be who she says she is. So, security is kind of good. But, and tell me what size churches. Do you have 2 employees? I'm from a church that just has 2. How about 3 to 5 employees?
1.5.
Okay, how about 5 to 6 to 7? Or 8? More than 10? Okay. Are you from a church?
My husband and I co-pastored for 15 years, and while we were at Trinity, we set up a nonprofit. It covered 6 rural communities in the area of domestic violence. Back then, that was back
What a
in the
ministry.
80s. What I learned from that, I was able to bring to the church when we pastored. I am one of these people that I can't believe that pastors don't have some basic knowledge, and I don't mean to be judgmental, but you know what, if you have a 501c3, you really should follow.
Amen.
Yeah. We, in our first pastorate, we got audited by the IRS, and our church treasurer had left the church. He took board meeting minutes with him, and when you tell the IRS that your former treasurer said that his dog ate the minutes, and this is a true story, it's funny now, it was a nightmare.
Yes, it was. Anytime you work with the IRS, it's a nightmare.
But anyway, I'm so glad you're doing this, because I just think it's important.
It is. And if nothing else, I'm not going to tell you how to do your things, but to know that if they aren't being done right, that you can be in trouble with the IRS, especially in payroll. That's the main thing. But you also, in your 501c3, if you don't do the things that are required, then they can yank your 501c3 from you. Now, fortunately, you're all within Montana Ministry Network here, and I've gotten the documentation. I can see it that our church is covered under that. So that was really good, because when I first got into the church, trying to figure everything out, I only just started that one in January. I was like, oh my goodness, I don't even know if this church has a 501c3. But fortunately, I could find out from the Assembly of God, even from the in Springfield. I could even go to the general council. So they were really helpful. But the thing is, you just need to know what you have and what you don't have, so that you can find out and make sure you do get it. The reason that you need to keep track of your finances is that you're responsible for the monies that the donors give. Many of them give to general funds, so that's at the church's discretion, their budget, on how that's paid. But many give to specific things. Like we have a gal in our church who always wants to give a check once a month. She does her daily or her weekly tithe, but once a month she wants to give a check to missions, because she really believes in it. It's something in her heart. So we need to keep track of what she's given, and also that it's been used for that. If somebody had requested something being given that was not part of what our ministry, and the illustration I had used earlier was if it was a casino. The pastor said, well, thank you for the $100,000, but having a casino is not part of our mission. And so it brought out all kinds of things. And so you have to go back to the person that gave the money and have it released, or have them say that, okay, you can use it for something else. But you can't go against what the mission is of the church.
No, I don't mean to interrupt.
That's fine. No, please.
There are some churches, and they have on their envelopes anymore, this will be directed towards ministries.
Mm-hmm.
And there are actually some pastors and church boards that think, if it's given to a specific person like missions, that it needs to go there, that the pastor and the board cannot decide to put it towards youth ministry. And
That's right.
And I know, that's fundamental, but I'm not certain even on kidding about that.
And they know churches exist, and they're not real friendly to us. So we need to make sure that we are on the up and up, and make our reports available to the congregation. We're not hiding anything from them. We want them to know that this is what we're spending the money on. It's paying for what you want to give it for, which is God's work. And so that's why it's really important for boards. I loved what Elliot said earlier about having a strategic plan. Need to be able to have a plan to work forward, and the accounting records will tell you how to measure that. Are you accomplishing it? Is there money going into that? And is it being utilized for that? So those are all really good things for boards to do, and to know that the accounting records should be able to show that. And if not, at least, your account should be able to talk to it. Some of the elements of a good financial system is that you do have a fund accounting. And a fund accounting indicates that if a person wants to give money for missions, it will go into the missions fund, and then when that is utilized for that, it comes out of the missions fund. It's in a restricted, and then it's released from restriction. So those are really important things to keep things, straight as best as you can. Also, you need internal controls of counting your money. And I think the church that I'm going to is so good, because they have 3 people that come in and count the money. So everything's viewed by everyone. They have copies of the checks made each time, and I have requested that they do copies of the cash also, to make sure. And then I keep all that copy, and then the treasurer keeps her copy of it. And so if anything doesn't balance, you're going to keep it known. Sometimes people fat finger a list of numbers, and sometimes they kind of get off. But we can always go back to find out where and how, and we can see the original documentation. So that's really important. In internal controls also, I believe having an approval process for purchasing things. People just shouldn't be able to go out and buy something and say, here, I bought this for the church, I hope you like it, and you owe me money. It needs to be approved. It needs to know that it fits within the mission of the church, so that it can be allocated to that fund. Another thing is the financial reports. They need to do, in the for-profit world, it's called a balance sheet, but in a not-for-profit, it's called a statement of position. And that tells you what your bank balance is, what your fund balances are, if your assets are more or less than your liabilities. And those are important things to evaluate. They say whether it's a going concern or not.
We call it, in our church, they call it a balance sheet.
Oh, okay, and in not-profit, it's normally called statement of position, but it's,
Essentially a balance sheet.
yeah. I've noticed the software that I'm using, they call it a balance sheet. It's like, I go in and I change the title, and it still comes up balance sheet. And that's because for years I worked with the Head Start program that was always done that way. The other one is your profit and loss. Churches don't have profits and losses. They have statement of activity, and they have revenues over or under expenses, is what the name for profit and loss is. But because it's not a profitable, it's mission oriented, and remembering that churches are different. They have a mission to carry out, and it's not to make money but it's to fulfill your mission. If your mission is for the homeless, you want to make sure you've got money that comes in and goes out to help those people. Bank reconciliations are really important. It's surprising the number of people that don't do bank reconciliations. And I tell my own children, reconcile your bank, and they go, huh? So you don't just write checks off of what you find your bank balance is. And that's kind of a sad thing. Then there are certain things that the 501(c)(3) status, you can lose it by doing some things. There's something, like politically, you cannot use money in a 501c3 to support lobbying or to support a political person. So there are things like that. You also, you can't do using the money that given to you for something that is not being given to you for. So, you know, there's lots of things that will take, and if it's not a 501c3, then you've lost your ability to have tax deductions, and somebody could come back and sue you and tell you, wait a minute, I wanted to take that off from my taxes, and unfortunately, they are not telling me that I can do that. So, you know, just follow what's needed.
Excuse me, I have another question. If someone donates something to the church and writes something specific on it, and that isn't part of the church commission, is the church responsible then to talk to those people and let them know? I guess the big question is, the church is responsible.
Yes, it is. It is the church's response, and they need to explain that. And if the person wants the money back, they need to be given it back. If not, if they want to use it for something different that was within the church's mission. And that's, you know, when you have your annual meetings, that's you talk about. The pastor usually lets you know what the mission is of the church, what we're gearing toward, of which he's put together with the board. So you all have to work together. Then, you know, many people believe that if you have somebody in finance, you just pay the bills and get the donations. There is so much more. A bookkeeper, not having very much experience, can also come in and do the data entry of entering for the donations or paying the bills. But an accountant will come in and evaluate what your financial statements say. And if there are things that they see that are like, oh, it seems like you're running a little hot on this, or not, that your electricity is way overboard, things like that, you can identify those things, you take it back to the board. Again, it's a whole joint thing with the board and the pastor. So they have that. And so bookkeepers are wonderful. You know, they're worth their weight in gold because it all has to be entered in the system. And then, you know, hopefully the bookkeeper does all the entry work, but the accountant can go back and do the reconciliations and say, well, yeah, that is what the bank says too. So then, again, you always have everything reconciled with a third party. That's what protects you as a financial person, is to know that you're in reconciliation for any number of things.
If I ask too many questions, please stop me.
Oh, no.
So for rural churches who haven't have bookkeepers, or sometimes they call them church treasurers, or, you know, whatever, do you, and maybe they feel like they can't afford an outside accountant or something like that. I think that's a challenge in our rural churches, because accountants are really, I believe personally, necessary in this day and age, so we churches don't get in trouble. Do you have any suggestions or resources where possibly a church could go and maybe not, you know, have to pay $1,000 a year to have somebody go over their books?
There are several of these, and I have some sheets of paper that I'll give everyone. There's some resources. But there are some of these companies that do all your church bookkeeping, or maybe they will only do payroll, or they would pay bills for you. So you can find those individual things like that. So that's an okay thing to get, again, you know, what you can afford and what you, it wouldn't be as much. What I'm going to do for Journey Church is, once I get all of the books set up the way they should be, I'm hoping Journey will hire a bookkeeper admin person. They come in and maybe open up an office, because at this point they don't even have somebody, there's not an office. And poor Pastor Dave doesn't have office hours. He's just there all the time.
What are these things?
Yeah, hours and hours and hours. But then I would come in as an accountant, and I will donate my services. That'll be what I do to help them stay on a good schedule of doing things and everything. So, and I'll do training and make sure that things are lining up. And So, that's how I do it. And many boards, the boards that we had with Head Start, when I started with Head Start, there were 21 employees. When I left, there were over 200. To start with, I think the budget was maybe $180,000. And when I left, it was $4 million. So growth is big, but you grow with it as you go along. And you get to the point where you know what kind of things need to be addressed. But on our board, we had CPAs, we had bankers, we had lawyers, we had, within the board, we had a lot of expertise from the community, which is, and board members on not-for-profits are not to be paid. So they are donated services, and very many. Now, they could certainly perform other services that they would charge for, but just as a board member. But their expertise is wonderful. So, by all means, grab who you can.
I briefly share a story. When my husband made a vocational change, he'd been an electrician. We went to Trinity for 4 years and came back to Montana to pastor a church. And the first church that we pastored, aging ministers tied to general counsel and to the network. And this is funny now. I hope you'll all laugh with me. I hope it never happens to you. We had a church treasurer that wasn't happy with us. Anyway, and we would pay our tithe to the church who was supposed to be sending it to the network. And when this man, after a year, left the church, my husband had me start looking over the books just because I had a tiny bit of knowledge. Well, what was funny is for over a year, he wasn't sending our tithes to the network.
Oh.
And Chuck and I thought it's strange. We didn't get a call from the presbyter or the superintendent or somebody saying, what is the problem here?
Are you there?
Anyway, thankfully at that time, Paul Goodman was the assistant, and they also get the name treasurer. But anyway, we had enough. We knew him well enough. We just called and said, "What do we do, Paul?" And the treasurer, his last annual report to the church wasn't correct. It was, quite honestly, it was a nightmare. And yet, I'm smiling today because
You lived through it?
yes, I just really would hate to see any other church have to walk through that. And part of that was there were no internal things set up when we got there once a year to have, somebody come in and reconcile or whatever your proper terms are. And like I said, and plus the treasurer also wasn't paying the gospel publishing house bill. I'm just thankful for the grace and love of Jesus Christ. I share this just because I think it's important for people to know those things can happen. We never dreamed that anybody would do that, but they did it. But God,
But I think people need to be trained in what the expectations are. And many times people come in and the gal that was before me had done bookkeeping with QuickBooks and had done it for businesses. So she had an understanding of that and applied that same knowledge. I keep remembering way back when I was, my children were little in preschool and they were in Montessori, and I did the books for the owner and his wife. So unfortunately, I just moved there from Washington State. I didn't know that in Montana they had state withholding tax, because in Washington there's no state tax. It's those things that you just don't quite know. So I had to do some quick determinations of okay, we need to send them some. So it's, you learn as you go. And, I'm just so glad we have a faithful God that's willing to forgive me when I think I know, but I don't know.
And also, board meeting minutes, that's a legal record.
It is.
I know when this gentleman decided to leave the church, he would not cooperate. Then,
So he had no supervision.
no, he didn't, and I remember when my husband and I went to the board, and the other two men on the board, and he said, until I sat down and told them, they really didn't believe that a church treasurer would do that. And it was really hard, and we were a small rural church anyway. And again, so when my husband would go to a board meeting, he would send the notes home, and I would type, the old term, type it out, and then he'd take it back to the secretary of the board, and I was really a bugger about those getting signed within a week. I can be kind of assertive. But, we did that because we loved that church. And that's something too, a lot of Catholics just don't know, just don't understand. You better have that signature on there, and the church better have records, because when the IRS calls,
And I do have a listing of what some of the record retention is, and that some things are permanent. And so, it behooves you to keep your permanent things in a locked area that is available for everything. That was another hard thing when I started, is I didn't know where to find everything. So I hadn't even seen some of it. But the board also has a responsibility to keep an eye on those things. They need to be trained. They're not going to know unless they have a little bit of training. And there's some good training things for boards. This is Fund Accounting for Church Leadership, a little download that I put on there, and it talks about some of those basic things. And now we need to be that much more accountable, and because we're not the favorite item on the planet, we need to be transparent with what we are doing, so people don't have to question or think. And embezzlement happens in churches just as much as it happens in Head Start programs or anything, because of the lure of money. I mean, Satan's really good at tickling your ears and saying, well, if that was cash, they would never know that you didn't have it. You have to be dependable. So, and the board needs to know, they need a good training lesson on what they're looking at, what they need to keep looking at. Like, if this is off, we need to do it. I'm really glad that our treasurer and I sit down before the board meeting and we put the board report together, and she looks at it and she goes, this doesn't look right. What is this? And we go back and look, and it's like, oh yeah, that's not an issue. This is that. Oh, that's right. You can't remember every single thing unless you can go back. And in accounting, you should be able to find your records. You should be able to find all your documentation. So, that's really important. Fund accounting is a hard thing to explain, and it's not everybody's understanding, but it's kind of like a pie. If you got a pie, you cut it into pieces, and each one of those pieces would be a pie, a fund. And so you put all of your income for that fund and put all of your expenses to that fund, and the difference is the net asset. So that's where the fund accounting comes in, and then you can come in and look at it. So those are, it's really important, and many people that work with businesses don't know that. I worked with Northwest Head Start. We got a really good book. She was a wonderful person, loved the Lord. It was just really fun working with her. But she had no knowledge of anything other than cash basis bookkeeping. And I said, we need to do this on an accrual basis. She didn't understand that in the least. What happens with Head Starts that need to be audited every year is that then the auditors have to make journal entries to put everything in the correct year, because you have to use all of the money you have to prove it. So if that includes some payables that you want included in this budget, you have to have it on the books. So with the best meaning heart, she was great, but she just didn't quite have that done, and I tried to train her in that, but she just, too many years of doing it the other way, so. The other thing is pastor salaries. If you have a pastor which you pay a salary and a housing allowance, that needs to look differently than regular salaries. Their regular clergy salary is taxed, and you have federal and state income taken out of that. Their housing allowance is not taxed on that, so you don't take anything out of that. And so it looks weird on your W-2 if you have, maybe $10,000 a year, and there's no Social Security, only $5,000 is maybe Social Security. It's like, what is this? Well, the software that we do our payroll through, and personally I'd rather do everything in one software package, but I can learn. But it will divide that out, and then what they do to make it less hard on the pastor is they take a larger portion of the federal withholding, and then what IRS does, or what you do when you do your 1040 form, that's where you reconcile. So they would have $10,000, but maybe they'd have $3,000 in taxes taken out, which was more than what their federal income is, but that $3,000 would pay the self-employment tax. But you have to do it that way. That's the issue that I had to try and put together when I first started it at Journey. So, and QuickBooks seems to think they can do that, but I asked for help. I talked to them. I said, would you put the right thing in? Oh no, we can't do any of that. So that's why I don't have a lot of faith in them. Then Dave Phillips gave me several questions that different pastors have asked. So I'll kind of go through some of these, and if you want more information, just holler at me. Do we need to file any paperwork with IRS or the Secretary of State on an annual basis? With IRS, you don't need other than your payroll reports, but you don't have to file anything with them. But with the Secretary of State, by the 15th of April every year, you have to submit. This is usually about $20. It's for this last year, it was free, but you don't. You only have to file that you are still in existence, and if who your corporate officers are, and if there were any changes or anything, address or something changed, you only have to change that every year, and that maintains your name. So that does need to be filed. It's not very much, and it's just acknowledging if it's any different. Mm-hmm.
Now there's a top end for that. Like if you make a certain amount, if your gross income is a certain amount, even with a 501c3, you have to go over and above and actually file taxes. Is that correct?
If you have unrelated business income, you might have to file something. If you have a gross income, because churches don't have income, they only have revenues over expenditures, and they have missions that they give to. That it's not like the same that with other 501c3s.
Okay.
Like with Head Start, they're required to do quarterly reports with the feds that gives them the grants, and then to do a 990 at the end of the year.
Yep, the 990 is the one I was thinking of, because I ran a museum and we had 2 years where we had $25,000, $30,000 profit, or not profit, but income, and it was like, that's over and above the postcard level, and so.
And did you receive grants or anything with that?
So we received grants on top of that. So that was, we sold some assets. We received a couple of large donations from people in the city. But as far as government money, that the government money, the grants, et cetera, were over and above that $25,000, $30,000. And so,
I'd have to do some research on that because I'm not aware of that, at least. And it says churches are exempt from having. So again, if it's a museum, it may be different than a church.
And that's why I was asking the questions. My experience was with that, and so. Cool. Thank you.
And with grants, then definitely they want. And with other not-for-profits, I think people in that 990, that they include donors, the size of donors and so on. So it's a little bit more required, where churches are not requiring that. Who knows what they'll do as we go along, but God's in control.
Amen.
That's all I can say. So what's a good accounting program for a small church? Something that works for you. I can even give you access to an Excel spreadsheet that does fund accounting for you, where you would enter your bill and what fund it would come out of and keep track of it that way. So it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. A lot of programs they have now are online. I can work on it at home. All I have to do is get it into the program, and it's really easy. We have another program that a health center, a health clinic in Columbia Falls, but that one we have to rent room up in the heavens. It's from Amazon, I think. But anyway, so I'm going to try and get that one changed over to maybe, because QuickBooks you can just do online. You can do it on your phone if you wanted to. But I think you need to find whatever is best for your church to give you the information that your board can make decisions with. Because that's the bottom line, is they need to make the good decisions to move forward. So, talk it over. And there's a lot on this little sheet. I've got a lot of references on things. I happen to have chose Apollos.com, and there's things in it I don't like, but there are things in there that I do like. So, if I had more time, I may have been able to look at a lot more programs than what I had. But you just have to look at what the size of your church is too, and what you have for manpower. What do you have a bookkeeper? How do you have it set out? But once you get fund accounting set up, you just follow that all the way through. So it works out. So, but you need to do your what your church needs. And if you're a very small church and you don't have very much funds, it might be that an Excel spreadsheet would do it. So, okay, do you need to fill out a 1099 for guest speakers or employees? And why is this important? You have to know the difference between an employee and an independent contractor. Independent contractors, you have them fill out a W-9, and we don't pay them until we've got the W-9. So I've been known to send emails to a company saying, I would like to pay you this week. Will you send me a W-9? And they're pretty quick at getting it emailed to me. So those are things that are important. And therefore, companies, but they have all the income that will be coming in from different companies. So they work for several different companies. They don't have the requirements that an employee would have. They don't have to be there so many hours a day or at a certain time. Generally, they have their own equipment they bring. We have a cleaning company. We have a window washer comes in and washes the tall windows. So those are things, and they don't do it all that often, but they do that. But
I'm sorry. So like we have a company that comes and like plows our parking lot when it snows, right? That's not an independent contractor. That's just a guy not a guy. He has a company that we pay, right? Or would you consider him?
I think if he does it for you, if he does it for anybody else, he's an independent contractor.
So,
Well, but if it doesn't depend on how his business is registered, because if he's sole proprietor of partnership, right, versus like an LLC, I don't necessarily, if he's an LLC, I don't have to do a 1099, correct?
If he's a corporation, you don't have to do a 1099.
Okay.
They're usually bigger. But I think with LLCs, because I know we send out, I do the books for the HOA that we live in. Anyway, so we send it out just because we know that they're a small business and they work for several others. It's not hard to get name. You have to have your registered name. My business when I was working, it was B. Wilson Consulting and Accounting Services. I had to have it registered with the state, and but then after that, I quit doing it, and I
It's
retired.
not a corporation, right?
No, it wasn't a corporation,
So
where
if they're incorporated,
you don't need 1099s to corporations. And now they're talking a lot about 1099s for things that, like Etsy, where people make a bunch of stuff and they send it to Etsy and they get that type of thing, which I would want to keep track of all of that.
Well, but on Etsy, they're independent contractors. They're contractors who are, and I would say, like, as far as the LLC and the sole proprietorship and like that, for insurance purposes, you're an independent contractor. I still have an independent contractor's, well, not contractor, but I cleaned the bank I worked at.
Mhm.
But I had to go get a business, register it with the state, and fill out a 1099, even though I was an LLC.
Mhm.
And I was it. I was the sole member. I was president. I was treasurer. But because it was me and I was providing that service, just like a lot service, I would have them fill out the 1099 if you don't need it.
Yeah.
You don't need it, but
Yeah.
CYA.
It doesn't hurt to send 1099s out. What they do with them is one thing, but you know, your responsibility is to indicate that you have hired an independent contractor and that you are giving them the 1099. They're talking about changes on 1099s with 1099K, which gets into the Etsy thing where they are independent contractor, but then getting money through Square. Do you know what Square is? There's a lot of farmer markets doing things like that and trying to track all of that because, you know, I think there's probably a lot of money funneling and they're looking for places to find it. So anyway.
so my other question is then do you have to get a new 1099 every year?
I would do that because people could have moved. Or they're probably not gonna change their employer ID number. Even if they don't have employees, they would have a number. But I would do it every year to make sure that when you send out 1099s, it will actually go to them in their current address. So, yeah, that's not wrong at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, do we need records of monthly board meetings or annual business meetings?
Yes.
You know that answer, definitely. And I have a listing of, and if you want this, just let me know and I can have it emailed to you. I didn't make copies of it. But of those things that are required and some that are permanent. And board meetings and a lot of things are permanent. So you have to keep a good file that keeps those permanent things there. They may not change. A lot of times you don't change things as you go along, but you've got to have, it's like the 501c3, it's a permanent file. I have it in a plastic sleeve, it stays. Do pastors get a double deduction? No. Should churches consider pastors self-employed or do they need to report income on a W-2? Pastors are considered common law employees because they are hired to do the ministry. As I was mentioning before, they have clergy salary, which is subject to federal withholding and federal gross income. Then they have self-employment income that they have to pay 15.2%, which is both the employer and the employees portion. And the church can't pay that for them because that's when they run into a lot of problems. And IRS will come back and say, wait a minute here, you said he was at housing, or so anyway, yeah. And that's new things that are coming in. Because it used to be the pastors were paid quite often with 1099s, and they figured all of their expenses to it. So things, you know, IRS is trying to clamp down on a lot more things, and it's better to do it right and not get stuck in the middle and know what's going on. I mean, ask the questions. So it's, are you doing this?
Well, and that just comes out of the things that have happened in the last 15 years with finances and like that. Churches are feeling the pinch kind of like banks did in 2007, 8, and 9. Small community banks got slapped with the same regulations as big banks. Small churches are getting slapped with the same regulations that mega churches are, you know, they just absorb it and we're like, help. You know, my nose is above water, but barely.
Barely.
Yeah, and so it's a hard road to hoe.
And it's really important. I mean, like our church sits on 6 acres, and if the property taxes up in Flathead Valley just skyrocketed. But because we are a 501c3, we only pay $183 a year on taxes.
Wow.
So what a blessing that is. Now, I know that they always want to come back and say, why do they get it, and so on, but
So I would love to talk to you about that later, because we're looking at, I think, $4,800 in property taxes for our building this year.
so I would say go to your property tax department in whatever county you're in,
I did.
and they said,
Well, so part of it is because our sewer is on our property taxes, and so we're being charged as a business because we, in our, yeah, I'm also on the city council, and so this is, it's funny because I do this, and it's really hard because I'm like, well, yes, we're a business, but it's based on that, so our property taxes are mostly based on how many hookups we have. Well, we have 4, and so we get charged $1,200 a hookup. And I mean, and then we're paying it like $500 on top of that or something. But I'd love to talk to you more about that, because I need to know how to go back to our assessors and be like, hey, this needs to change.
yeah, you probably have to read what the county says about that, because they kind of make their own decisions.
Right.
But yeah, I'll talk to you.
Thank you.
I can't promise anything, but I can talk to you.
But it'll at least give me another thread to pull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it really is a benefit, because, I'm sure that if the property and the church building that we have in Columbia Falls were taxed the way other things are taxed, it would be, $8,000 or $9,000. Because it's a lot of property and it's a lot of building, a big building. Okay, another question, do pastors get a double deduction if they own their home and receive a housing allowance? If they own their home, the amount of their housing allowance would be what they figure it costs to live there. So, and again, I have a form that puts out housing expenses and what you can deduct. And the thing is that pastors must keep all of their receipts, because if they claim $50,000 in housing expenses, but their receipts don't come up to that, the rest of the money above that gets taxed at normal rate. So it's important to keep track of all of that. But, so anyway, if you want to, I'll give you my email when you get done, and then you can email me if there was anything that I talked about you want more about. I can give you this whole presentation if you want. But but again, make sure that your pastor is being paid in the way that they should be paid, because you can get into thousands and thousands of dollars. Penalties and interest from IRS for not doing it right. And understanding the difference between clergy pay and housing pay, and that's listed in box 14 on the W-2. And the amount of receipts, those are really important things that pastors understand also. So they remember to keep their receipts. And sometimes I've worked for enough companies that keeping receipts is not what they want to do. It's like, I'm sorry, but it all gets reconciled on the 1040 when they do their taxes at the end of the year. Then, hopefully it's all reconciled. You don't have to submit your receipts, but if you ever get audited, you need to have your envelope with your receipts and the year that they are all for available, so that IRS could say, oh yeah, I guess you're okay. So, and you can decide, and one good rule of thumb about deciding on housing interest is find out what is your rent. What is the average rent up in Flathead Valley? I mean, my granddaughter is living in a place that's $2,000 a month. I'm going like, whoa. And some places are not as much. Gentleman in the prior section, his was from a small shepherd, I think the town was. And their taxes were, or their rent was really, really high. But if you have some kind of a thing, that you can, compare it to, so that you're not looking at asking for a lot more money. And the board decides how much money it is. I mean, you can bring to them, well, my house is $7,000 a month for paying it. It's a big house. We can have church there. But if the board says, oh, we can pay half that, we can pay part of it. But, the board makes the decision and they negotiate with the pastor so that it's an okay thing. Because there's a lot of sacrifices that pastors do, and some of it is living, they don't get very much, but if they get a housing allowance, it helps pay for some of that. And the last question was what type of retirement plan are available for clergy? And I can make a recommendation. If you go to Dave Ramsey, and my husband and I have facilitated Dave Ramsey for several years down in Billings when we lived down there, and now for the last 2 years up in Columbia Falls. They have financial people, and Dave Ramsey's thing is make sure that they're good teachers. Because when you set up, you have to have a goal in mind. And if a pastor has a goal in mind that he wants to retire at this age and have so much coming in, they can find out. They've got all the calculations to do that. So you can do a lot of different things. One is the best if you do a company match, a church match of 2 or 3%. And if he puts in 2 or 3%, you put in 2 or 3%. He could put in 10%, but you still would just match up to that 2 or 3%. And that's a good beginning to get things going. And if you get it going when they're young, they can have $1 million when they retire. Many of us didn't, like in Head Start, we did not get funding. Our grant did not include retirement until 1996. So we couldn't even start doing a retirement plan in that building. But we were growing like crazy, so we were able to get retirement going. So those are the things that you have to talk about. And certainly there's a lot of information about this. And I will let you take one of these and pass it on down the line. Yes. These are some of the resources that I found. Some of them I don't necessarily like what Live Parable, I think, is out, and they think QuickBooks is good enough, but I can't agree with that. Live Your Parable, I think is, and thank you. But you can find a lot of good information. The one that I really like is, and this is, you can order it, Church and Tax.com. They put out a lot of very good books that you can get information on. So it's good to have something you can refer back to. I'm like that. I'm sorry, I can't learn from a video. And a lot of the programs have videos going. You can learn a lot from it. And praise be, I'm glad that they can do that. I'm just not there. But you need to do with whatever works best for you. Which, like my program that I'm using is called Apollos, and they let you do a demo. So you could do a demo and see how you like it. But now that I've been working with it for almost 4 months, there are things that I find in it that may not like. I'd like to have a listing of the checks that were written. And so many programs integrate with your bank. So you can have all your bank things come in, but you gotta make sure you're not writing checks over here and the bank's saying it's over here, and it's, yeah. So, you just look at all those different things, and does it give you the reports you want? The one that I'm working on, I can download it into an Excel file and make the report look like the budget report that our board's used to seeing. So it then becomes really good.
I have a question. Do you think it might be helpful if, once a year, from the network office, a reminder might be sent, out to boards to, check and see how things are going, this type of thing. I know in some small churches for years, the treasurers would put their money in their pocket or in their purse and take it home, and that, and then a pastor will come in and say, you can't do that anymore. And I think I can relate to a church treasurer who would faithfully served, for like 20 years. Sometimes I think they take it personal.
I've always done it this way.
Yeah,
It's
and
never been a problem.
It's not a personal thing against the treasurer. Really, it's a protection for them that you should have somebody else
That's true.
count the money. Because I think sometimes pastors go in and they have this knowledge, but it's hard for their boards to understand why.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea, and you might bring it up to Dave Phillips. He might appreciate that. I mean, when my pastor talked to him, and he thought, well, maybe she'll come here and talk. So that's how I even got here. So, I think that would be a good idea, because there are so many unknowns out there, and so badly you could go $10,000 in penalty and interest. So let me give you my name and my phone number and my email address. Bonnie Wilson is my name. And my email is bwilsonconsult@gmail.com. And my phone number is 406-885-3311. And I know many times I've been to conferences and things like that, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I should have asked that question. So feel free. I won't be home until next week. I'm going to go visit my son Billy's. But just let me know if you want my presentation. I can certainly, I do have some handwritten notes here. I would have to type it out, so it was better. And I have these record retention and housing allowance forms that if you want those, I can send them to you too. So, any other questions?
Thank you for listening to the Montana Ministry Network podcast. The Montana Ministry Network is a network of 82 Assemblies of God churches across the state of Montana. To learn more, visit us online at www.montanaministrynetwork.com.